A moment earlier, the shuffle of shoes filled the federal courtroom. A heartbeat later, silence. Judge Edith H. Jones, an emblem of judicial rigor in America for nearly 4 decades, lifted her gaze and locked eyes with Representative Jasmine Crockett. This was no routine professional gathering. It was a rare instant when judicial power stood face to face with legislative power. "Congresswoman Crockett," Judge Jones said, her voice even and cool, "your recent statements about the justice system are troubling. Your view of judicial independence reflects a serious misunderstanding of the Constitution." The packed rows froze. Legal scholars, reporters, members of the public, all held their breath. They braced for a counterpunch. What came next was even more unexpected. This wasn't a simple admonition from the bench. It was a stress test of institutional respect, a moment that could reshape how we talk about justice in a democracy. If you're drawn to those rare, real-world collisions where reason, humility, and bedrock principles meet, follow Jasmine Crockett File. We tell these defining conversations calmly and fairly, no sensationalism, so you won't miss the quiet seconds when history changes course. Instead, they were witnessing something truly historic, a direct and rare clash between a respected federal judge and a sitting member of Congress, for everyone present. What followed left everyone in the room stunned. In just a few carefully chosen sentences, Representative Crockett delivered a response so powerful and unexpected that it converted criticism into admiration and turned silence into loud, sustained applause. This was far more than a routine courtroom reprimand. It was becoming a lesson in respect, humility, and the true meaning of public service. If you want to see more moments where wisdom meets humility and timeless principles guide our democracy, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. These are the stories that help restore trust in American institutions, and you won't want to miss a single one as this extraordinary exchange continues today. To fully grasp the weight of what was unfolding, we need to focus on the 2 women at its center. One, a legendary figure in the judiciary. The other, a rising star in American politics, stepping into a moment larger than any single speech. Judge Edith Holland Jones embodies the best of the American legal system. Appointed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit by President Ronald Reagan in 1985, she has spent nearly 40 years serving the nation with integrity, fairness, and a deep, meticulous respect for the Constitution that has guided every decision from her bench. Now 74, Judge Jones has presided over more than 3,000 cases and is admired across the political spectrum for her careful preparation, balanced decision-making, and unmatched knowledge of constitutional law. Born in Philadelphia and raised with strong traditional values, Jones graduated from Cornell University and the University of Texas School of Law, where she was one of only a few women in her class. An early test of grit she met with quiet resolve. Throughout her career, she earned a reputation for sharp intellect, a direct courtroom style, and an unwavering belief that judicial independence is essential to American democracy, the very safeguard that allows principled debate to flourish, even in moments as charged as this one. Recently, Judge Jones had grown increasingly worried about the surge of political attacks directed at the courts. She watched with mounting concern as some politicians openly questioned the legitimacy of federal judges whenever rulings did not align with their agendas, framing legal outcomes as partisan skirmishes rather than constitutional judgments. Meanwhile, Representative Jasmine Crockett was making waves as one of the most passionate new voices in Congress, her profile rising with each appearance and policy push. A 43-year-old lawmaker from Texas, she carried into office a successful career as a civil rights lawyer and public defender. Known for championing justice reform and confronting systemic inequality, Crockett had built a reputation as a fearless advocate for the underserved and overlooked. However, several of her recent public remarks triggered controversy within legal circles. During hearings and in media appearances, Crockett criticized certain federal court decisions as outdated and suggested that some judges were impeding progress rather than serving justice. While these comments resonated with progressive supporters, many within the legal establishment regarded them as disrespectful and inappropriate in tone and substance. Challenges to judicial authority meant the tension had been rising for weeks. Legal scholars published op-eds warning of the crucial need to respect judicial independence. Bar associations issued public statements reminding lawmakers of the proper norms for discussing court rulings. And Judge Jones, long known for restraint in public commentary, wrestled with whether she should address the issue directly, weighing the cost of silence against the responsibility to defend the judiciary's constitutional role. The opportunity arrived during the annual Federal Judicial Conference, a high-profile gathering where judges, lawyers, and at times elected officials convene to examine the system's most pressing issues and compare notes on reform. Crockett had been invited to speak about criminal justice reform, an invitation that would soon set the stage for a dramatic, unforgettable moment that none of the attendees had anticipated. Have you ever seen a single conversation change someone's entire perspective? Share your thoughts in the comments about why respectful dialogue between branches of government matters. We'd love to hear how moments like this have shaped your own views on authority and respect. The morning sessions moved along with routine updates and careful presentations until Representative Crockett stepped to the podium. Her remarks were passionate and meticulously researched, centering on sentencing disparities, deteriorating prison conditions, and the urgent need for deep structural reform. The audience listened closely as she laid out her legislative priorities and a clear vision for change. But roughly 15 minutes into her speech, the cadence shifted, and with it, the room's energy. Too many federal judges, she declared, are stuck in outdated ways of thinking. Their interpretations of the law must evolve as society's understanding of justice and equality grows. A low murmur spread through the courtroom. Several judges shifted uneasily in their seats. Building momentum, Crockett continued. When judges repeatedly issue rulings that uphold systemic inequality, we must ask ourselves whether they're truly serving justice or simply maintaining an outdated status quo. From her place in the front row, Judge Jones remained composed, though those who knew her well noticed the faint tightening at the corners of her eyes, a quiet signal that her concern was rising. The judiciary, Crockett pressed on, cannot hide behind claims of independence when its decisions consistently benefit the powerful over the vulnerable. Respect must sometimes be earned, not automatically demanded because of a title or position. The atmosphere changed markedly. What had begun as a policy discussion was now evolving into something far more confrontational and consequential. Legal experts exchanged brief, wary glances, sensing that a pivotal moment was approaching, one that could test the boundaries of institutional respect in real time. Judge Jones rose slowly from her seat, unhurried, yet resolute. Even at 74, she carried herself with the same dignity and authority that had defined her decades on the bench. As she walked toward the podium, the room fell utterly silent. "Congresswoman Crockett," she began, her voice steady and firm, "I appreciate your passion for justice reform, but I must address the troubling implications in your remarks." Crockett, caught off guard by the intervention, straightened at the podium. Two powerful figures, one representing Congress, the other the judiciary, now stood face to face in a moment that would test the outer limits of institutional respect. "Your recent public statements," Judge Jones continued, "including what you've said today, reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of the judiciary's role in our constitutional system. When you suggest that judges should rule based on social outcomes rather than legal precedent and the Constitution, you undermine the very foundation of judicial independence." Her tone remained calm, but the authority behind each word was unmistakable. Furthermore, she added, your suggestion that respect for judicial authority should be conditional based on whether you agree with our decisions sets a dangerous precedent. It threatens the separation of powers that our nation's founders considered essential to protecting liberty. Crockett remained silent, clearly absorbing the weight of the judge's words. The room stayed still, every eye fixed on the unfolding confrontation. This was more than a heated exchange. It was a defining moment that could shape how Crockett would approach institutional relationships for the rest of her career. Judge Jones, Crockett finally replied, her voice softer and more measured than before. I appreciate your willingness to address my concerns directly. Could you help me understand where I may have overstepped? It was a simple question, but it marked a dramatic change in tone. Rather than defending her stance or escalating the conflict, Crockett chose humility and a willingness to learn. The shift was immediate and visible to everyone watching. Judge Jones paused, recognizing the significance of Crockett's response. Congresswoman, she said, your passion for justice is admirable and necessary. But there's an important difference between advocating for reform through legislative channels and suggesting that judges should abandon legal principles to achieve social goals. The courtroom remained silent as the two women engaged in what was becoming a deep, thoughtful conversation about justice, authority, and the boundaries of respect between institutions. When you question the legitimacy of judicial decisions based solely on their outcomes rather than their legal reasoning, Judge Jones continued, you contribute to a dangerous erosion of public trust in the courts. That loss of confidence ultimately harms the very communities you're trying to help, because the rule of law is their strongest defense against unchecked power. Crockett listened closely, her posture relaxed but attentive, signaling genuine interest rather than defensiveness. Judge Jones, she said, I'm beginning to see that my frustration with certain rulings may have led me to speak in ways that weren't appropriate. How can someone in my position continue to push for reform while still showing proper respect for judicial independence? What happened next stunned everyone in the courtroom, including Judge Jones herself. Instead of defending her earlier words or falling back on familiar political talking points, Representative Crockett made a decision that completely changed the tone of the encounter. Judge Jones, Crockett said, her voice filled with a sincerity that had been absent before. A wave of gasps swept through the courtroom. In an era when public figures almost never admit mistakes, this act of humility was truly rare. Several attorneys exchanged stunned looks, and even court reporters paused mid-sentence, astonished by what they were witnessing. Over the past few months, Crockett continued, her voice growing steadier and more confident, my frustration with what I saw as unjust outcomes led me to make statements that were both inappropriate and disrespectful toward the judiciary. I now understand that I allowed my passion for justice to cloud my grasp of constitutional principles and the proper relationship between our branches of government. Judge Jones's expression softened slightly, though she remained composed and dignified. The courtroom was silent, so silent that even the bailiffs, usually stoic and detached, leaned in to hear every word. As a former attorney, Crockett went on, her hands clasped in a sincere gesture of regret. I should have known better. I should have remembered that the strength of our legal system comes from its independence, not from judges making decisions based on public opinion or popular trends. My comments suggested otherwise, and for that, I am deeply sorry. The change in tone was extraordinary. What had begun as a tense confrontation had transformed into a meaningful exchange of understanding and institutional respect. Many senior lawyers in attendance later said they were moved to tears by the authenticity of Crockett's words. Judge Jones stepped closer to the podium, her black robes whispering softly in the stillness. Her demeanor shifted from stern authority to something almost like mentorship, even as she retained the poise and seriousness expected of her position. Congresswoman Crockett, Judge Jones said, her voice carrying both the weight of her experience and an unexpected warmth. Your willingness to reflect and reconsider shows exactly the kind of character our democratic institutions need. It takes real courage to admit mistakes publicly, especially for someone in your position. She paused, letting the gravity of her words settle. But more importantly, your passion for justice, when properly directed, is vital to ensuring our legal system evolves in the right way. The legislative branch plays a critical role in reforming laws that no longer serve justice effectively. My concern was never about your goals, but about the methods you propose to achieve them. Crockett nodded thoughtfully, her defensive tone gone. Judge Jones, would you be willing to help me understand how I can advocate for the reforms I believe in while still showing the proper respect for judicial independence? It was an extraordinary moment. A sitting member of Congress asking a federal judge for guidance on how to do her job more constitutionally. The humility in the room was undeniable, and its impact was immediate. Many observers later said they had never seen an elected official demonstrate such genuine openness and willingness to learn. For the first time during the exchange, Judge Jones smiled, a small but striking gesture that softened her normally stern features. Congresswoman, she said warmly, I would be honored to help you understand how passionate advocacy and institutional respect can work together, instead of against each other. She moved slightly, now addressing not just Crockett but the entire audience. This was no longer just a conversation. It had become a lesson for everyone present. The beauty of our system, Judge Jones explained, her tone now that of a teacher delivering an important lecture, is that each branch of government has a distinct but complementary role. Your responsibility is to identify problems in existing laws and write better ones. Our responsibility is to interpret and apply those laws based on the Constitution, not based on desired social outcomes. She gestured toward the framed Constitution displayed on the courtroom wall. When you see court decisions that seem to perpetuate injustice, the correct response is not to attack the judges for following the law. It's to examine whether those laws themselves need to change. That approach respects institutional boundaries while still allowing for meaningful reform. Crockett listened closely, pulling out a small notebook and jotting down notes, not as a politician defending her views, but as a student eager to learn. The sight of a member of Congress taking notes from a federal judge sent another ripple of astonishment through the courtroom. So, Crockett asked, glancing up from her notes, when I see sentencing disparities that I believe are unjust, my focus should be on changing the sentencing laws, not criticizing judges who are following existing guidelines. Exactly, Judge Jones replied, her approval clear in her tone. And when you pursue that work with genuine respect for judicial independence, you'll discover that many judges actually welcome thoughtful legislative reforms that allow us to deliver justice more effectively. We see the shortcomings of existing laws every single day, but our oath requires us to apply them exactly as they are written, not as we might wish them to be. She paused, then spoke with striking honesty. I've spent 37 years on this bench, watching even well-intentioned laws lead to unintended consequences. Many of us in the judiciary would gladly support legislative reforms that address these problems, but those changes must come through proper constitutional processes, not through political pressure aimed at influencing judicial decisions. A look of realization spread across Crockett's face. So, you're saying that judges and lawmakers should be partners in improving the justice system, not opponents fighting over outcomes? Exactly, Judge Jones replied with a satisfied nod. When each branch respects the role of the other, we can work together to build a more just system while still protecting the constitutional principles that safeguard everyone's rights. The tone of the courtroom had changed completely. What began as a tense confrontation had evolved into a masterclass in constitutional governance, mutual respect, and the balance of power between branches of government. Legal scholars present would later say this was a moment destined to be studied for generations. Judge Jones, Crockett said with a newfound conviction in her voice, I want to publicly commit to changing how I talk about judicial decisions. From now on, my advocacy will focus on reforming laws rather than criticizing the judiciary, and I hope you'll hold me accountable for that commitment. Turning to the courtroom audience, she added, I also want to apologize to any members of the judiciary who felt disrespected by my earlier remarks. Those of us in elected office owe you better. Judge Jones nodded approvingly. Congresswoman Crockett, your commitment is both noted and deeply appreciated. And yes, I will hold you accountable, not as a critic, but as a colleague equally dedicated to the proper functioning of our constitutional system. The moment that followed would stay with everyone in the room for the rest of their lives. The courtroom erupted into spontaneous applause, a rare and powerful sight in a federal court. It began with a few attorneys, then swept across the room until the entire gallery was standing and clapping. Even the court staff, known for their strict professionalism, joined in. Judge Jones allowed the applause to continue for almost a full minute before gently raising her hand for silence. When the room quieted, she offered what many described as the perfect conclusion to this extraordinary exchange. What we've witnessed here today, she said, her voice carrying both authority and warmth, is precisely what the framers of our Constitution envisioned. Different branches of government engaging in respectful dialogue about their roles, each committed to serving the American people while staying within constitutional boundaries. Looking directly at Crockett, she added with genuine respect, Congresswoman, you've shown today that true leadership sometimes means admitting mistakes and choosing growth over pride. That is exactly the kind of character our democracy needs. As the session came to a close, something unprecedented happened. Several other judges approached Crockett to shake her hand and personally thank her for her humility and renewed commitment to constitutional principles. Observers later described the scene as one of the most powerful displays of institutional respect and collaborative spirit they had ever seen, a moment where conflict transformed into partnership through the simple power of humility and honest dialogue. The aftermath was unlike anything the legal community had seen in decades. Within hours, video clips of Crockett's apology and Judge Jones's gracious response spread across social media, drawing millions of views and overwhelmingly positive reactions from across the political spectrum. What made the moment so powerful was its sheer rarity. In a time defined by political polarization and constant attacks on institutions, here was a sitting member of Congress publicly acknowledging a mistake and seeking guidance from a federal judge. It was a return to the kind of mutual respect and humility many Americans feared was gone forever. Major news outlets quickly seized on the story, publishing headlines that celebrated both Crockett's humility and Judge Jones's wisdom. Legal experts from across the ideological spectrum praised the encounter as a model for how government branches should interact, with mutual respect, honest dialogue, and a shared commitment to constitutional principles. What we witnessed today was truly extraordinary, said Harvard Law professor Lawrence Tribe. Representative Crockett showed that political courage sometimes means admitting you were wrong, and Judge Jones demonstrated how judicial authority can be exercised with both strength and grace. And even the American Bar Association issued a formal statement commending both women for embodying the highest ideals of public service, democratic leadership, and institutional respect. The official statement released afterward noted that the courtroom exchange offered an important lesson for every public official. Maintaining healthy relationships between the branches of government is vital to a functioning democracy. For Representative Jasmine Crockett, that moment marked a turning point in how she approached advocacy and public service. In several interviews after the incident, she spoke candidly about how the experience had reshaped her thinking. Judge Jones taught me something I'll never forget, Crockett explained during a national television interview. She showed me that you can fight passionately for justice without disrespecting the institutions that uphold it. My job isn't to pressure judges into ruling my way. It's to create better laws that enable them to deliver justice more effectively. When asked what motivated her highly public apology, Crockett's answer reflected real personal growth. Sometimes the most important thing a leader can do is admit when they're wrong, she said. I realized that my approach was undermining the very goals I cared about most. Judge Jones helped me understand that institutional respect and justice reform aren't enemies, they're partners. Judge Jones, in her own follow-up remarks, stressed how crucial that moment was for American democracy. What Congresswoman Crockett showed us today is exactly what our system needs. Leaders willing to learn, grow, and place institutional integrity above personal pride. The separation of powers only functions when each branch respects the role of the others. Today's exchange proved that such respect can exist alongside passionate advocacy for change. The educational ripple effects of their conversation stretch far beyond the courtroom. Law schools across the country began incorporating video footage of the exchange into their constitutional law courses to illustrate the importance of interbranch respect and constructive dialogue. Political science professors described it as a textbook example of how democracy is meant to function, with each branch maintaining its independence while engaging in meaningful conversations about their respective responsibilities. Most importantly, the exchange inspired real change in political behavior. In the weeks that followed, several other lawmakers publicly rethought their own rhetoric about the judiciary, crediting Crockett's example for shifting their perspective. 6 weeks after the original event, Representative Crockett and Judge Jones appeared together at a national constitutional law symposium. Their joint appearance, once unimaginable, demonstrated how their relationship had transformed from confrontation into mutual respect and collaboration. Their presentation on advocacy, reform, and institutional respect received standing ovations from legal professionals and was widely hailed as a model for how government branches should work together. What I learned from Judge Jones, Crockett told the symposium audience, is that real reform starts with understanding and respecting the system you're trying to improve. You can't build stronger institutions by tearing down the respect that sustains them. Judge Jones, in turn, praised Crockett's evolution as a leader. Congresswoman Crockett has proven that passionate advocacy and institutional respect can complement one another powerfully, she said. Since our exchange, her legislative work has been both more impactful and more respectful of constitutional limits. The long-term influence of their encounter continued to resonate deeply within legal and political circles. Young lawyers and future policymakers cited the event as a guide on how to acknowledge mistakes gracefully and how humility can transform conflict into cooperation. As one constitutional law professor remarked, what Judge Jones and Representative Crockett gave us that day wasn't just an example of institutional respect. It was a masterclass in how American democracy is supposed to work when people put principles above pride and value learning over being right. Their powerful exchange reminded Americans that democratic institutions grow stronger not by avoiding disagreement, but by engaging in it with humility, respect, and a shared dedication to constitutional values. At a time when such examples had become rare, that moment in a federal courtroom rekindled hope that wisdom, civility, and institutional integrity can still guide public life. And in the end, Judge Edith Jones's call for judicial independence and Jasmine Crockett's heartfelt response did more than surprise a courtroom. They offered a powerful reminder that American democracy thrives when leaders are willing to learn, evolve, and place institutional integrity above their own egos. If this story of wisdom, humility, and institutional respect renewed your faith in American leadership, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We're dedicated to bringing you more stories of genuine character, leadership, and constitutional principles in action. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us which other examples of real leadership and institutional integrity you'd like us to cover next. Jasmine Crockett File.